Thank you. All right, friends, we're live. So as people come into the meeting room, over the next 5 minutes or so, Ayla will be able to share a video from the National Farmers Union in Canada. And then we could go around and introduce ourselves. So Ayla, is that video ready to show right now?
Yeah, it should be. Hi, everyone. While I get this up here, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Ayla Fenton. I'm with the National Farmers Union of Canada. I live and farm on the territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples here in Canada. Let me see. So I'm just looking at sharing my screen now so that I can show you this video. So members of the National Farmers Union have created. Here we go. Have created this video as part of the counter mobilization efforts. And essentially what you're going to see is a number of NFU members explaining how they perceive food sovereignty. Just make sure that the volume is up here. Okay, and if anybody can't hear anything, just flag me and I'll try to fix it. Thanks.
I stand against the UN Food System Summit because I believe that the future of sustainable food systems lies with our communities and not with corporate power.
To me, food sovereignty means raising my own food and participating with my community in the production of a local food system.
It means not needing somebody to feed myself and my community. It means having access to markets, local seeds, and culture, and farm workers that allow local farms to work.
As an organic farmer in the Prairie region of Canada, where farmers have adopted many of the high-tech, big investment strategies that the United Nations Food Systems Summit is advocating as the solution to hunger, sustainability, and climate change, our experience tells us that the outcomes of such big investments, sophisticated technologies, and powerful machinery are also high debt loads for farmers, alarming losses of biodiversity, ecological destruction, and ever-increasing rates of greenhouse gas emissions.
It seems to me that the processes leading into this are completely flawed, and that the people who are deemed to be the experts are the managerial types, the people behind corporations, and the billionaires that are leading foundations in terms of proposing solutions that are not actually going to change the problems within the food system and deal with them as proactive solutions.
So really the only players that can enter into the game are corporations or trusts. And it's impacting a whole generation of future farmers in Canada and Turtle Island.
And I've made a good living on a 100-acre farm, largely by resisting global domination agriculture. We've raised vegetables for many years and sold them directly to consumers. So we grow food for people. And a good example of this is the rye behind me here. This is Sangusta rye, developed in 1837 in Estonia and grown here for cover crop seed and flour for rye bread. We can keep the seed and grow this crop year after year. A fine example of avoiding global domination in the whole seed business.
The Food System Summit actually just promotes the corporate interest and the quest for profit. So I stand with La Via Campesina and our allies as we mobilize to ensure that we can make noise and raise our voices against the Food System Summit.
Here in Canada, we're seeing that the real experts are the farmers on the ground and people doing grassroots work within the food system to create more justice and more ecological farming and so on, especially agroecological farming. And concepts like agroecology and food sovereignty are rising in Canada, despite the propaganda that is coming forth from corporations and others within the corporate industrial food system. the solutions exist. We, including eaters or non-farmers, will not be duped by efforts to co-opt those solutions, to water down agroecology, and we will not be fooled by talk of things like nature-based solutions, nature-positive food systems, or anything else along those lines.
It certainly does have a lot of power and influence here in North America, but having met farmers from other places, it has less influence in other countries. So sharing stories, I mean, there's a lot of farms that are very independent of the corporately kind of controlled food system.
You know, speaking as someone who's chosen farming, you know, my life hasn't had to rely on, you know, growing food in my backyard. I can go to the grocery store. So, you know, corporate agriculture has impacted, you know, quite a bit of my experience growing food for people and for myself and my community. But it pales in comparison to the impacts it has on folks who are less privileged than myself.
Things have to change. They're not going to be changed by corporations and foundations that are led by billionaires. And I don't think that it seems like it's going to be through the UN Food System Summit. So with that, I will say to those who are leading this process in the UN to get out of the way and let farmers and those who are doing the work on the ground make the changes that need to be made for a more just and truly sustainable food system. Thank you.
Thanks, Ayla, for showing that video from the National Farmers Union in Canada. We're going to do a round of introductions real quick, but quickly, I'll just provide a quick framing of this panel discussion. So we're here as part of the counter mobilization to the UN Food System Summit. It's an autonomous process organized as an extension of the civil society and Indigenous peoples mechanism. Global coordination space for social movements and Indigenous peoples to engage in UN processes through the Committee on Food Security. And so my name's Tyler Short. I'm in Kentucky. I'm a beginning farmer with Family Farm Defenders and La Via Campesina. The title of this panel is The True Costs of Highly Developed Industrial Food Systems. And the main reason we want to have this discussion is to say that the UN Food System Summit is going in the wrong direction during this global crisis, and that everyone here in the panel has the solutions that we need to raise up to public officials, and that we need to continue building at the grassroots level. So with that, I'll pass it over to Ayla for introductions and to get into the first questions. Thanks.
Sure. Hi again, everyone. For those who've trickled in late, my name is Ayla Fenton. I am with the National Farmers Union in Canada. I am a farmer and an organizer, and I live on the territories of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples. And I wanted to start to open this with a land acknowledgement, because we recognize that as people living and working on the land, farmers share a unique responsibility to the Indigenous peoples and communities whose communities and laws govern the lands and waters that we depend upon. And we start with the land acknowledgement, not just in a token or ritual way, but because our aim here is to center Indigenous jurisdiction over land in our discussions of food sovereignty, and to center settler colonialism as a key aspect of food systems that need to be rebuilt. So I invite you all in that spirit. I know that we're all joining in from very different places across Turtle Island. So I would invite you all participants, those of you who are on Zoom, can maybe introduce yourselves in the chat and share about what territory you're joining from. And in the meantime, I will have our wonderful and generous panelists introduce themselves. So perhaps I'll just go in the order that I am seeing on my screen. So perhaps Gabriel, you could go first, maybe introduce yourself a little bit, and if you could include a bit of a description about what your work within the food system is.
Yeah, thank you so much. Extra special greetings to each and everyone in Zoom land today. My name is Gabriel. I'm from a tiny Caribbean island named St. Lucia. I'm based in Toronto. I got to Canada as a migrant worker, migrant farm worker. I spent 4 years as a migrant farm worker in Canada. And I want to tell you that in Canada, it is legal to exploit the environment. It is legal to exploit people. It is legal to exploit the soil. And I am with a group called Justice for Migrant Workers. What we are fighting for, what do we need, what is our vision? A food system, a Canadian food system that is healthy, that is sustainable, and that is just. And how do we go about it? We go about it by doing so many things. One, we educate, we advocate, we organize, sorry, we mobilize, we inspire people, and we push people to take action. And ultimately, what do? We pressure the politicians to change those unjust laws and policies that create inequality and unfairness in the Canadian food system. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Bridget, would you like to go next?
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks for the invite. Northwest Territories, it's Treaty 11 territory, and I'm not a farmer. I'm not in any way incorporated with any huge movement aside from my Indigenous people's rights. I'm a researcher for the Arctic Athabascan Council, as well as a policy advisor. There's a lot of optimism out there with respect to food systems, our role, how we can advocate, and I hear Gabriel loud and clear, but the reality is really not what we're living, and we live in a fight every day for our rights and proper use of our land, protection of our land, the sacredness of our water and our animals. And it may not be agriculture for some, but for us, it's food sovereignty. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. Jim, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. An honor to be part of this panel. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Jim Goodman. I live in southwestern Wisconsin in the United States. I was an organic dairy farmer for about 20 years, and prior to that, a conventional dairy farmer on the farm that my grandfather bought in the late 1800s. Our farm is on territorial land of the Ho-Chunk, the Sauk, and Fox Indian tribes. And now that I'm retired, I have more time to spend working with the National Family Farm Coalition, where I'm currently the board president, as well as Family Farm Defenders, U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance, and the Via Campesina. I've met with a lot of farmers around the world, and I've come to realize that we all small farmers share the same problems, being caught up in a global economy that cares nothing for farmers or food, but only for corporate profit. And it's destroying our environment, it's destroying our communities, and it's destroying all the small farmers, and leaves no opportunity for beginning women and migrant farmers to get land and have access to the food system that they really are the ones that are best capable of running and providing decent, nutritious food and protecting the environment. So I look forward to a fruitful discussion today. And again, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next up, we've got Kiana.
Hi, morning, afternoon, folks, depending on where you're at. I'm Kiana Mickey. Thanks for having me here. I'm really excited about this call and this conversation. Folks might know me. I wear a few different hats. I'm currently on the board of Urgency, and I'm an active and proud CC member of the CSM, the civil society mechanism, and help support and represent consumer constituencies. I have worked as a community advocate and as a leader in food systems and trying to improve or increase racial, economic, and environmental equity in our food systems work locally, as well as nationally, and when I get the chance to work in collaboration internationally. So right now, I recently have done this work as a nonprofit leader of Just Food. I was executive director for for 3 years after working my way up in different roles, connecting to farmers, community leaders through training, through education, and supporting small viability. And what I started to as I continue to do this work, I started to see that oftentimes the most impacted were not the decision makers of the models, of our groups, or even accessing resources. So as I continue to try to do the work within the nonprofit industrial complex, I also saw the constraints within that. And I decided to start working as a consultant to really try to find ways to improve small farm viability, find ways to authentically operationalize equity in all its forms, and really try to create models and support folks to build the models that they want to build and see and drive and increase self-determination. So whether that's a CSA or buying wholesale, or even building a community-based food hub, it can look different ways, but ultimately it's really around trying to increase food justice and sovereignty from while you can still meet a mission and meet a budget without being as extractive, and finding new alternative methods to do that and building a solidarity economy. I live in Harlem in New York City, so a lot of my work has been rooted here since COVID, and this is the home, the original lands of the Lenape.
Thank you, Kiana. And last but not least, we have Noah.
Thanks, Ayla. Thanks, everybody. Good to be here with y'all, and hope y'all are having a great day. My name is Noah McDonald. I'm a beginning farmer and also the Research and Land Work Coordinator for Southeastern African American Farmers Organic Network, better known as SAFON. SAFON was founded in 2007 by Cynthia Hayes and Dr. Wusu Bandele. It's the first Black organic farmers network in the United States, and basically serves to promote the health, vitality, and viability of Black ecological farmers in the Southeastern United States and Caribbean. Specifically, what I do as the Research and Land Work Coordinator is we're currently in the process of discerning mechanisms to preserve land in many of our member farms. Many of our member farmers are farming land that has been in their families since the 1880s and 1870s, immediately after emancipation in the United States. So a lot of SAFON's broader work is connected to preserving cultural legacies within families, and also continuing economic viability of our members' farms. And I'm also a beginning farmer. I live in Massachusetts right now. I moved here from Atlanta because of COVID to live with my partner, and we do a lot of food sovereignty work with her tribe, the Nipmuc, here in Massachusetts. The place where I live is Wampanoag territory. And yeah, it's good to be here with y'all. Looking forward to this conversation.
Awesome, thanks, Noah. And thanks to all of our panelists for being here. It's so great to have, I think we were commenting before the panel started, we have quite a wide geographic range here, all the way from the Arctic to the South. So I'm gonna let Tyler take it away with the first question, but I just wanted to remind everybody and the participants that we are organizing this panel as more of an informal conversation style. So if you do have questions that you'd like to ask the panelists, feel free to pop them into the chat at any time. And Tyler and I will try to incorporate them into our conversation. Tyler, did you want to take it away with the first question?
Sure. Thanks everybody for introducing yourselves. It's a pleasure to hear a little bit about your work. And so let's see if we could dive in a little bit. If we could maybe first start talking about settler colonialism as the basis of this capitalist food system in North America. You know, if we could maybe talk about, Bridget, if you could start by emphasizing the importance of treaty rights. And how in this context that treaty rights are being violated, both in Canada and the United States. And maybe we could then transition to looking at how communities can assert our rights to land, even if these governments that control us do not respect our rights. So Bridget, over to you on treaty rights and your relationship to building community power in defense of these rights, please.
Okay, good morning. Well, treaty rights were an agreement between two partners, so two parties, two different people with different worldviews. So the Indigenous worldview has been practically ignored. The treaty was supposed to be a friendship treaty with where Indigenous peoples were not to be harassed in any way on their lands. However, that is not the story of the day. And as a Métis person from Canada, my roots go back to the Red River. We were engaged with the settler right from the start. We were huge providers through the Hudson's Bay Company for furs and other supplies from our land. We know that the bison, buffalo, have been practically eradicated because of greed of the Hudson's Bay Company as well. And then the greed of the European needing certain furs, the beaver in particular. So we're finding now that we deal with new terms, modern day treaties, self-government agreements. However, all of these new agreements come at a cost, and the cost to isolating various Indigenous peoples from one another and our trade systems and our trade routes. And harvesting, protection of our animals is a huge importance to us. However, we're coming up against interest groups that do not appreciate our Indigenous worldview, our Indigenous rights, our own Indigenous spirituality. So we have the land that, you know, heritage sites, new parks coming up, and these parks are on Indigenous territory, but they're federal regulated parks. So a lot of times these parks also take away rights to the resources in the park areas, which then impacts Indigenous people's health, not only with from their medicine, taking away their rights to their medicines and their spirituality. So those are huge concerns when you talk about treaty. What does a treaty really mean, and what was the spirit intent, and what does free, prior, and informed consent mean when the government of the day, the government of Canada, is looking to extract resources? So those issues are huge legal issues, and oftentimes there's too much pressure on small, remote Indigenous communities to really uphold their rights because they're given different stories. They're told that they'll have they will retain certain rights. However, that's oftentimes not the story that and the lived reality of the situation.
Noah, maybe I could pass it to you. It sounds like there's some similarity between treaty rights being violated and then in the United States, this assault on heirs' property rights. If you could maybe share a little bit about SAPON's work in protecting Black families' land tenure, and Kiana as well, if you could talk about the role of Black and Brown communities, asserting their rights to land.
Sure, thanks, Tyler. I would say first, SAFON, we're organizationally in a place where we're not able to offer specific the legal and technical assistance, and there's a number of organizations in the Southeast that do. So I would say the most predominant one doing work is the Federation of Southern Cooperatives. They have a counseling service for families with heir property, and they also offer legal assistance and land, title disputes, clearing title, helping create family trusts and things of those sort. SAFON, we're more in a formative period in thinking about what specifically our strategy would be, and a lot of that, I think to go back to the history is that, African Americans, we were brought here from Africa to serve the interests of capital and to, accumulate, to be the forced labor to create the capital that plantation owners, global merchants, et cetera, accumulated. There was no intention whatsoever for any of us in the past, or I would even say the present, to own land or to have any sort of deep power and agency on the land within this legal framework of the United States. And so really the large landowning class that used to exist for African Americans in the United States, 12 million acres before World War I, 1914, around that time period, was really the result of this very intense realization by freed people, which was that land was power and that land was the route to freedom. And that 12 million acres was almost entirely the result of the agency and the desire and the focus and the work of Black farm families and freed people, with very, very, very little support from the federal government. There was the Freedmen's Bureau, and then there was a general amnesty offered at the end of Reconstruction by Andrew Johnson, the sitting US president, to former Confederates, which was a bait and switch, which saw many Black Southern farm owners evicted off of lands that they had worked on for generations, enslaved. And then, you saw basically that cycle being repeated over and over again within the USDA. And that is a long, long history with many repeated offenses. So essentially, the work now is that there's been a disruption and a destruction of a Black landowning class in the United States, and not only land owning, but even just seated on the land, connected to the land, and enacting relationship with the land. The Great Migration over 40-year period can be seen as a diaspora within a diaspora. And the mechanization of Southern farming and the corporatization of Southern farming basically, initiated a flight from the land, a forced flight from the land into urban areas in the South and urban areas in the North. And a lot of Safon's work, just this big issue is to reunite and reforge the connections and bonds of this kind of like mini diaspora that has occurred. And that really has looked mainly with like working with membership, with our farmer members, to really create a sense of identity, doing a lot of political education, exchanges, labor exchanges, farm stays, kind of assemblies, to really foster a sense of consciousness around what's occurring. And from there, we'll be able to really resource a lot of our farmer members and really build out solid land bases throughout the states in which we work in, and really bring folks back into the fold, bring young people back into the fold, and really create this intergenerational cohesion that is so needed to continue to have Black agrarian lifeways into the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I totally echo what Bridget and Noah have lifted. I think what you're hearing is this intentionality within the, the lands of, America and Canada around having, racism and capitalism and how intertwined they are. And that, so much of our economic system is not just built on the stolen land, and also the exploitation of natural resources and the exploitation of labor. And so, to even talk about the connection around settler colonialism, we have to kind of really also frame it within this racialized capitalism. And that there's just this deep intersection and this reliance between the exploitation of labor and people, harmful agricultural practices, and how that creates a problematic profit for a select few, and how it steals land, but also denigrates the land. And at the same time, we've been built on, policies and structures and entities around that was designed to continue that disproportionate inequity. So on one hand, it's supposed to foster land-based wealth and power for white Americans, or certain white Americans, at the expense of Black and Indigenous folks. And we continue to see that. So as much as there's been progress in our policies, as much as there's been progress in terms of trying to access land again, find different ways to build land tenure, we're still kind of pushing against a system that, like Noah said, was built for us to never be a part of. So, when we, talk about that, that's something that still impacts us today. So in order to really talk about what we can do in the future, we have to continue to honor, or not honor, but acknowledge, like, these are the forces that we're still working against. And it's systemic, it's purposeful, and while it impacts us all as individuals, there's a true institutional piece to this that really keeps food being used as a weapon and purposely divesting us, the most marginalized, from power and segregation of resources, which then also impacts our ability to create the models that we want to see grow the way we want to grow, and steward the land the way that we know is regenerative. And the one thing I would add to that is, some of my work, also frames in the context of like urban lands. So when we think about, oftentimes when we're talking about farmers, there's this pastoral narrative around farming. And I really do believe that we have to divest from that. And even within urban farming and urban growing, there then now has become this contemporary, also pastoral narrative, I would say, around that too. And what it does is it really kind of builds singular stories and narratives, and it co-opts the language of solidarity. It co-opts the language or practices that really connect us all in order to try to resist and get back to the land, get back to ways that we can steward, get back to the ways that we can have tenure where it's not just held in ownership. And then it gets co-opted by whether it's corporate interests or other groups. And that's something that we continue to see on rural land as well as urban land. And so in urban spaces, I know like in New York in particular, majority of the growing that's happening is on community garden land. And the majority of that land is under government ownership. So even when you see these stories of folks and community gardeners, it's not to say that there isn't a lot of hard fought work being done there, and it's not a lot of reclaiming of land. But when we only hear of one or two stories, what we're actually not hearing is that persistent struggle of the folks doing the work under lease agreements, under developer pressure, under natural pest pressure even, and we're not really able to talk about how to build policies that the most impacted become the most activated. For urban land, for rural land, and then also it keeps us disconnected from building power within ourselves, with ourselves to push.
Thank you. Before I pass it over to Gabriel and Jim, Bridget, I'm wondering if you would like to add anything as this conversation has progressed, maybe a little bit about the connections between urban and rural land control.
Well, in the territory I reside and I come from, all land was Treaty 11, Treaty 8 territory. However, throughout the years, there is need for exploitation, extraction of resources, especially oil and gas. And we don't have an urban or rural type philosophy. This is our land. Wherever Indigenous peoples reside, it's Indigenous peoples' land. We have remote communities. We have settled land claims. We have self-government communities. But all these come from a colonial perspective. All these come from this modern day treaty. Language, once again, gives Indigenous peoples what the white government wants to give them. The table that was never a clean slate to negotiate access, use, ownership, collective rights of Indigenous peoples. So this divide and conquer of modern day treaties, of self-governing communities, doesn't necessarily lead to self-determination in the extent that people are self-governed. They are governed under the rules of Canada and what's in the government agreements and modern day treaties. So I think that, Indigenous peoples really have to take a decolonized approach when they're dealing with the government of Canada. They have to ensure that what their ancestors left them is what they will leave for the next generation. So there has to be, I hear the word education all the time. Well, it has to be knowledge transfer. The knowledge of the Indigenous communities to the government of the day. In the territories, we have a legislature that has a lot of non-Indigenous MLAs, but we also have a huge proportion of Indigenous legislatures, politicians, if you want to call them that. However, we are not seeing real systemic change in the system. We are not seeing the upholding of Indigenous people's rights. We're not really seeing the voices of the gendered, the non-binary, or woman. We have co-management regimes that are still practically a colonial approach to how we'll manage and access our resources. So those are still huge systemic racist policies and programs that we are faced with on a day-to-day basis. If I could, give you an Arctic perspective and not a rural urban perspective.
Thank you so much. Gabriel, as we're talking about colonialism, enslavement of people as part of this food system that we live in the United States and Canada, the industrialized food system, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about how when migrant workers are trapped in this system because of either inaccessibility of land or the inability to have a dignified livelihood in their home countries, that forces them to go work somewhere else where they're experiencing high levels of exploitation. So if we could maybe just keep on this theme of extraction of labor and presenting ways to fight against this, such as your organization's work, Justice for Migrant Workers. Gabriel, and then Jim on the questions of settler colonialism and how to fight against it.
Thank you so much. Can I ask for a favor, Mr. Tyler? Time is moving so fast. Can you slow down the hands of time for me? But I want to follow up from Bridget and Noah. I fit so perfectly in their story. Let me start off with my name. There's so much I can say, but let me see how simply I can put it, right? Look at my name, Gabriel Alladwa. Gabriel, Christian name. The capitalist turned me into an earth angel. So I am somebody's angel. Somebody has decided to make this earth their heaven. So I am their angel. So my labor is used to subsidize the lifestyle of my colonials. That's my first name. My surname is Alladwa, which is Muslim. What happened is my mother was of African descent. And we know the history of Africans, as Noah said. We came here and our labor was forced, right? We were forced labor, slavery. My father was of Asian descent, and he came as an indentured worker. What happened is after emancipation in the British West Indies, which was in 1838, and in the French West Indies in 1848, after emancipation, the then freed slaves, they had an option whether to continue to work on the land or whether to move away from the land. But slavery was not just slavery. Slavery was so barbaric that most of them chose to move away from the land. So the plantation owners were left with a problem, very little or no workers. So they then turned to Asia to bring in indentured workers. That is why my surname, my father was able to keep his surname because he came in as an indentured worker. But now, Mr. Tyler, I will decide whether I'll punish you or whether I'll reward you. Why? It's because of your silence. You've never told me about the injustices that migrant workers face in Canada and in the US. That is why I am in Canada, because of your silence. So I'll decide whether I'll punish you. Now, being a descendant of somebody of African descent, slave descent, and an indentured, now I am being forced. I didn't come to Canada. Had I come to Canada by free will, I'll be a tourist, I'll be a visitor. But I was forced to come to Canada. And what are some of the things that forced me? There's so many things, but let me tell you 3 of them. Because of a hurricane, I was forced to come to Canada. What are countries, what are people causing global warming and climate change? What are the countries contributing to the problem? It's the developed countries like Canada and USA. Who are the countries paying the price? We in the global south paying the price. So we are forced to come to Canada. If you look at Canada, Canada is the home, the corporate offices for most of those companies that exploit, that displace, that do mineral extract. And so Canada is the home for those offices. Canada and the US is forcing us. I was forced to come to Canada because of the USA, because of the World Trade Organization. Before, banana was our main crop in St. Lucia. We had preferential treatment to the European Union. But the US said, what are those small boys to have preferential treatment? The playing field should be level. It should be an open playing field. So can we compete? And the WTO is just one of many institutions that the developed countries have in place to keep that wide divide. So I was forced to come to Canada. And the truth is, if you look at the pandemic, a lot of people have lost their jobs. I was wondering, that was a great year that really tested the program that brought me and that keeps bringing migrant workers to Canada and the US. Because of the pandemic, lots of people lost their jobs. So I was expecting Canadians to turn to farming, to go to food production. We encourage to stay home, stay home. People are asking, is our food supply reliable? How reliable is it? They want us to stay, but where is our food coming from? Is it reliable? So I was expecting Canadians, so many Canadians lost their job. I was expecting them to turn to agriculture, to go and produce food. But up to now, Canadians still refuse to turn to food production. Why? To do the work, to do the work that migrant farm workers are doing. Why? Because the conditions are so inhumane. It is not just. And being a migrant farm worker, we face 20 injustices, and they are every level of government. So the whole system, and as Bridget said, the inability to enforce those treaties, those rights. And we all know, we've heard it and we keep on hearing it, stolen lands, dishonored treaties, whether it's Canada or the US. That is why migrant workers are forced to be in Canada. And in a nutshell, I'm really thankful for this conversation. I hope that you've slowed down the hands of time so we can talk more about it. But the truth is by talking about it, then we can discover that there's power in our hands. Right now in Canada, the farmers, their lobbyists, they lobby the politician, they control the politician. But at the end of the day, it's we as consumers. That is why I'm so happy for this opportunity, because in your hands, there's power as consumers, and we have that power to push the system to bring more equity, more equality in our system. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love your energy, everybody. We'll pass it over to Jem, and then we'll have Ayla present the next question.
Yeah, just a few brief comments. And I mentioned that I live on territorial land of the Ho-Chunk, and under treaties, they were repeatedly pushed out of Wisconsin, but they always came back to try and reclaim their land. And they had some success. They even were able to use the Homestead Act to actually become landowners. And I think we see, as Kiana was mentioning, the abuse of communities of color by pollution, whether it's urban communities where factories build, it's always done in communities of color because they have the least power to resist. And I think we see in Canada with projects like the tar sands pipelines, that's territorial land of Indigenous people that are polluted. And the pipelines come through the northern United States. And we see that the people leading the protests are Indigenous people. And we also know that all people of color have the strongest reaction to protect the environment, whether it's in urban communities or in places like around the Chesapeake, where when industrial hog and poultry farms get impacted by flooding, the manure runs into the Chesapeake Bay across the land of many farmers of color. So it's just goes to show that colonialism still exists, and it always impacts people of color, whether they're Indigenous or Hispanic or Black farmers or Black community dwellers in urban areas. And as Gabriel said, we have the power if we can stick together and fight against this. And I think we see that every day with the pipeline protests and similar activities that, again, are led by people of color.
Thanks, everyone. Before we move on to the next question, did anybody want to respond to anything that came up throughout the course of that section? If not, then I will move on to the next question that we have prepared. And just a reminder to the participants as well that feel free to add questions into the chat if you'd like to ask any of the panelists anything, or if you have a general question for all of them. So, part of the reason that we're here today is in a counter mobilization to the UN Food System Summit, which of course is pushing this model of industrialized food systems that we have here in the so-called developed nations into the rest of the world. And as in the United States and Canada, we have been dealing with the increased industrialization of agriculture for 80, 100 years now. And so I'm wondering if folks can speak a little bit to the lessons that can be learned from the experiences that we have here. What impact has this industrialized system had on producers, on workers, on consumers, and the environment? And what are some of the challenges that we have here that are unique in this system with regards to pursuing agroecological production, or the transition to a more just social, economic, and ecological relationships? So the impact of industrial agriculture on workers, producers, and then some of the challenges in transitioning away from it here in the United States and Canada. Did anybody want to go first, or should I call on the panelists? Gabriel, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, please. Let me see if I can start off the conversation. First of all, I want to say, I heard in the first round about family farms, and Canada has run away with that. And that is the impression Canadians have, that food production is family owned, and the whole concept of corporations controlling the food system has got buried into that conversation, which is convenient for them. But let me tell you, the truth is that one of the impact of industrial agriculture is there's power in the hands of there's power concentration in those few people. And as a result of that, look at the three pillars of the program that brought me to Canada. The three pillars. One, we are there to do jobs Canadians do not want to do. And what are the jobs Canadians do not want to do? And I tried to touch it during the pandemic. So because of high unemployment, Canadians still do not want to do those jobs. And what are the jobs? The dirty, the difficult, the dangerous jobs. And that is what the industrialized agriculture has done, to make sure that the jobs that migrant workers do, they are dirty, difficult, and dangerous. In other words, they are non-unionized jobs. For a minute, can you think of the working conditions associated with non-unionized work? Another pillar of the program is we are there to do those dirty jobs, but we cannot apply for status. And in Canada, what is status? If you have status, you have rights. If you do not have status, you do not have rights. And we know Canada was founded on free labor, cheap labor, disposable labor. From the Chinese railroad workers, Canada continued to use unjust immigration and unjust labor laws to work in tandem, to keep migrant workers vulnerable and precarious, basically to perpetuate 18th century work conditions, to perpetuate exploitation. And look at the third pillar of that program. We are tied to our employer, not only by a contract, by a tied work permit. Let me go over these three pillars. We are in Canada, we are brought to Canada to do the dirty work, non-unionized work. We are tied to our employer, and at the same time, we do not have status. In Canada, if you do not have status, it means that you are denied basic human rights. In Canada, if you do not have status, you are denied basic labor standards. So let me go over that. To be tied to your employer, to do their dirty work, and at the same time being denied basic human rights, being denied basic labor standards. That is the program that brought me through. And that is one of the impact of industrial agriculture in Canada. That is one of the impact. Who are the people planting your food? Who are the people picking your food? Who are the people packaging your food? Who are the people processing your food? In the rest of what are people preparing your food? What are people distribute? All of these are people of color. So the impact is that the same slavery plantation structure, that people of color are at the bottom, not of the ladder. It is said at the bottom of the ladder, but it is a ladder, we can climb the ladder, but we are always at the bottom. So it's the bottom of the pyramid because only a few are at the top. And that is one of the impact of industrial agriculture on workers. So I hope other people can take it from there because of time. Thanks.
Jim, I see your hand up. You can go ahead.
Well, I think the last year or so, the pandemic showed us the weakness of the industrial food system, because at the same time we had processing plants closing down because the workers were sick. We saw grocery store shelves going empty. And having lived in this same place all my life, I remember a time when we used to have small cheese factories every few miles down the road, and small meat processing plants and vegetable processing plants. And that's all gone. As Gabriel mentioned, the union labor that used to run the mid-sized processing plants is no longer. And so there's really no competition for small farms as to where they can sell their products, because it used to be if you didn't like the cheese factory that your milk was going to, you could go the other direction and find another one. And that's all gone. And the big industrial agricultural companies, whether they control meat processing or dairy or anything else, they collude together to fix the prices, to keep farmers from making a decent living. And we all know that the quality of the food grown in an industrial system is much lower than what farmers that direct market or work through CSAs or farmers markets or whatever produce, because all industrial agriculture cares about is profit. They don't care about the quality of the food. They don't care about the farms. They don't care about the workers. They just want to make a profit, and yield is the only thing they worry about. If yield comes at the cost of the environment, of workers, of small farms, of local communities and jobs, that's just part of the way it goes, and they really don't care. And I think with the farmer protests in India, we see those farmers recognize that that's the system trying to be foisted upon them. The same problems that we've seen in the United States and Canada and some of the northern developed countries with farmers being pushed out of business. The Indian farmers see that that's what the industrial agriculture has planned for them. And it doesn't work. Trust me, it doesn't work. I was pushed out because organic farming became industrialized, and I couldn't compete with the prices of organic that organic farmers could, because they were utilizing cheap labor and they weren't following the regulations. So it impacts all small farmers. And if we can't change that system, if we can't fight what's going on at the UN right now, we're not going to have small farmers or small communities that are viable anymore.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. I'm just going to lower your hand here. Kiana, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always interested by a question like this, because the evidence is so apparent everywhere we look. We can look to the left, to the right. We can look in our communities, we can look, at our comrades abroad. Like, we are seeing fires, we're seeing droughts, we're seeing strikes, we're seeing, water insecurity, food insecurity increase. We're seeing tainted resources. So, and yet, we're, this injustice across the board, and yet we are still taught or conditioned, or we have systems that are telling us, no, it's working. This is the way to do it. It's really the only way to do it. And we need to do more of it. And you know what? We have some more solutions, and we'll bring it over to, other lands and countries. So it's like, let's continue to exploit, let's continue to extract, and do not look at all of the obvious intersecting crises that we're living through. Do not connect the dots between your divestment in power, where you live, where your access to food, if you even have the opportunity to grow your own food. Do not connect these dots, because this is the system that works. And like, to Jim's point, even in the midst of COVID, now let's add a pandemic to these results, or these obvious pieces. And even then, it was within our food system, we saw corporate systems stall. And at the same time, I could speak from my lens here, hearing from small and mid-scale farmers, wanting to figure out how to get to the city or get their food in, not because they didn't have it, but it was, what is the relationships and the transparency of those channels and the logistics that will keep us going. So for all the times where we were seeing, bottlenecking and long lines at the grocery store, and and then again, the dumping of surplus in the fields or, in other food security models. We saw the relationships and transparency and resiliency of our regional systems kick in second gear. What didn't kick in was the capital and resources to really help those folks scale up to maybe reach more folks beyond our, say, existing farmer network channels or CSA channels or wholesale channels. What we didn't see is the resource allocation as strong back into the food security systems, into our food sovereignty models, our food justice models. And what we saw was not even just the dumping of surplus food from corporate systems back into our communities tenfold, but we then were told like the models that we all should have pivoted to help our partners and comrades and community needs. We can't pay people to do the food box work or the extra food box work. We can't pay farmers, or even like I saw hyperlocal growers having to pivot from their growing work, their food justice work, the food that they were growing in order to, accommodate for the emergency pieces. So not to be able to do them and, together, but this continued silo of stopping food justice and food sovereignty work in order to support food security. And I want to be clear when I'm talking about that, it's not the mutualism between us to help each other, but it's the large scale system that creates at a surplus that then builds a tax incentive profit to then use our communities of color, of low income, to be dumping grounds for that food. So then we become continued waste receptacles. We get the life cycle of this food, not at peak freshness, not at harvest, or not even close to harvest, but at the way in after they've extracted everything from it. And then that's supposed to be the start of our liberation or the start of our survival programs. We can't continue to resource stopgap measures in our systems and think it's going to address the food insecurity, the housing insecurity, or the job insecurity that we continue to face. And I feel like, to me, it's like also what I'm seeing with these efforts, whether it's, again, ramping up food security models, emergency food models, or even mutual aid efforts, like trying to scale up those are immediate responses, and that's what they can and should be. But many of those models were then expecting similar donation scales from small to mid-scale farmers or businesses at a way that corporate or large scale can do. But they're built to do that, and they're built to be able to benefit from it. That's something that, while we will always find ways to support each other in solidarity through our models and through our systems, we can't continue to divest from the economic system that supports us all, or that solidarity economy, that multiplier effect within farmers. So yes, I've seen farmers donate small to mid-scale, and I don't doubt that will ever stop, but we can't continue to build models or support or put resources into models that then ask small and mid-scale farmers to only donate, or to have to pivot their businesses to not doing the work that they do so well. Or businesses, I've seen businesses that were rooted in supporting their communities, businesses that were rooted in food and culinary education, activism, restaurant work, even to then have to pivot to soup kitchens or mutual aid efforts. And I totally understand those desires and efforts to want to feed our community, but it's this conditioning of the system that tells us this is the only way we can do what we do, and then not get resourced fairly and adequately to do what we know we can do. And we're never going to see true thriving and liberation. We're not going to even survive climate crisis if we're not really able to build alternative models that are rooted in sovereignty, that support us in our connections, in our systems. Sorry, yeah.
Don't apologize. That was such an excellent point, Kiana. I'm glad you brought it up. I actually work for a community food organization in here in Kingston, Ontario, and we do food reclamation and distribution work as well. And it is unbelievable how much money is coming down from the federal government of Canada right now since the beginning of the pandemic, like millions and millions of dollars for emergency food aid, like the food charity, exactly what you're talking about. And instead of investing in local food infrastructure or investing in making the multitude of land that is around here available to communities that are food insecure.
Which we know has been proven to really feed us and feed our communities. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about continuing the dependency. It looks like Noah's got his hand up, and then Gabriel.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for speaking to that specifically, Kiana. I want to talk a little bit about that dynamic between charity and actually developing local infrastructure. A lot of saffron farmers over time they built, back in the early days of saffron, they built their enterprises and farms on supplying local institutions, schools, local schools, hospitals, nursing homes, different care centers, local farmers markets. And for, that takes an extraordinary amount of relationship building and trust building, and I would say like humanism, I guess is a good term, like actually treating people as human beings. And I think that it's so much easier when you're aiming to create a profit and accumulate wealth to just completely disregard that. There's no, I would even say, like on the local, state, and federal level, policy is not geared towards a social or cultural agenda. It's geared towards an economic agenda. And in terms of supporting like landed Black farm owners in the Southeast is seeing like serious, not only monetary investment and policy investment to build local food infrastructure, but also human investments to actually like step by step actually work with and create relationships. I think that is like a huge vacuum, I think, that's really present. And I think something that saffron's, we're trying to step into that kind of work. But yeah, I just wanted to add that. I think, fits neatly into this theme of just like complete dehumanization of the land and of people.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. Gabriel, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the impact of industrial agriculture on consumers, we've been learning that with technology that there's efficiency and there's increased productivity. Shouldn't that translate into the cheaper cost of foods? Is that in truth and in fact a reality, that the cost of food is less? Every year we're saying there's new technology which should translate into increased productivity, increase everything, right? But in truth and in fact, is the cost of food really cheaper? The consumers should be the ones laughing. But what do we see? What do we see? That Canada, and I'm not too sure with the US, but Canada has a supply management system in place. They control the amount of product on the market. If everything that is being produced should be allowed to go into the market freely, can you imagine what the real cost of food would be? But as a result, one of the impact is that there's power in the hands of a few. They're able to control, and that is one of the impact of modern agriculture, industrial agriculture. They're able to control. And at the end of the day, is it the consumers who really get the benefits? No, it's profit that's been preserved. They control the supply. Another important thing I noticed in Canada is that, and somebody touched it a while ago, when our food is being produced by people who are concerned about profit, what consideration is given to the consumer's nutrition? Are we given more nutritious food or less nutritious food? Because profit is the objective. And that is the impact of industrial agriculture on the consumers. In terms of the environment, I wanted somebody to touch on that. I am not an expert, but in Canada recently, I heard that agriculture, it is so much pesticides is being used in agriculture that the population of bees are impacted so negatively. And I've not been hearing much of that. I do not have research on that, but we know that it is legal in Canada to exploit the soil, to exploit the environment, to exploit workers. So it's not surprising that if the amount of pesticides that are being used and the kind of pesticides so are affecting the bees, and we know what is agriculture, what is our future, what is the earth, what is nature without bees, right? And if there's disregard for bees, can you imagine where our food system is heading? And as we all know, the common denominator is profit, profit, profit at the expense of everything. I want to tell you too, another impact I want to touch quickly on workers, that there's so much power in the hands of our employers. They control the travel agency that books our flight in and out of Canada. Technically, our employees are CBSA. And because of that, we cannot speak up for better conditions. We cannot say anything. Why? Because there's so much power in the hands of our employers. To control the travel agency, it means that you cannot speak up because the threat of deportation keeps us quiet. And that is one of so many things that makes us vulnerable and we're being exploited. So one of so many things. And ultimately, Canada, the whole system is carefully designed to make migrant workers invisible, to make the exploitation invisible. And that is by design. But it makes us invisible, but let me see if I can tell you something that's visible. When I look at the flag of Canada, I see red and I see white. On 2 occasions, Canada have been really, 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 really good to me at 2 very significant occasions in my life. Because of time, I cannot go into detail. I felt red and white in my country with love. I felt the love of Canada in my home country. When I got the opportunity to come to Canada to earn my livelihood, I was forced to come to Canada, but when I got that opportunity, I said, if Canada is so good to be in my home country, now that I'm coming to Canada, what a great opportunity is waiting for me. Only to find out that in Canada's flag, that there's a leaf in the flag. But what color is that leaf? Red. In my home country, red means danger. And every time I see that red leaf, it reminds me of the 20 injustices that migrant workers face in Canada. 20 injustices, and the red leaf reminds me of the danger that we face in the production of food. And all of that is because there's so much power in the hands of an employer, and related to what Bridget said, the inability to keep to force the people to honor the treaties. And that is the price we face day in, day out. So the impact, to me, the impact of industrial agriculture on the environment, on workers and the consumer is not positive, and it should be positive, but it's not positive. Why? Because we know the common denominator is profit, profit, profit at the expense of everything. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gabriel. I wanted to give the last opportunity to speak on this question to Bridget, and I'm wondering if maybe, Bridget, you wanted to pick up on that question that Gabriel was raising about the cost of food. I know that the cost of food is a major issue in Canada's north, in the Arctic in general, but also just maybe more broadly, you could speak to the ways in which the industrial food system, colonial food systems have been imposed, and the eradication of traditional food systems, or maybe not the eradication, but the displacement.
Well, I think we heard the word policy throughout the conversation this morning, and then we heard the word act, and of course we so many of us know of the Indian Act and how dehumanizing that is for the First Nations people of Canada. But also, you know, when we think about food sovereignty and food systems, and then once again it's coming from a non-Indigenous worldview. I put in the chat that, you know, in the Arctic we're meat eaters. So now when we talk about food sovereignty, food security, then the talk is about, well, you know, build a community garden. Well, that's foreign food for us. You know, you'll never hear me say I'm craving a salad, because that's not what I was raised with. You'll never hear me say I'm craving an apple or an orange, because those foods are not really in my diet on a daily basis. So when we're talking about what do we need with respect to food sovereignty, then the conversation has to be from the community, at the community level. And what do we mean by the protection of our animals? Because, you know, we hear, you know, on a daily basis, our caribou numbers are down. While caribou is a huge food source for us. You know, we hear that, you know, there's diseases in our buffalo. You know, we have to be concerned about global pollution, because it's impacting the land and our soil and our waters. So then it's impacting our berries and our lichens and plants and medicine. So, you know, in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, a lot of that language is, to me, just fluff. We also had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, 94, I think, calls to action. However, none of those were specific to food sovereignty and food security. You know, we talk about Indigenous food systems, and yet through the Indian residential school policy, children are used as experiments as to, you know, not only lack of food, but the type of food that they were fed in these genocide camps. So, you know, to me, when we're talking about food sovereignty, we have to talk of it from the community level and what we're used to eating and what we prefer to eat, not food that is processed and junk food that's in the stores that, you know, pop a lot cheaper than bottled milk. You know, our women are being told to watch breastfeeding because of contaminants in certain parts of our northern territories. So you're once again, we're looking at we're having conversations that we're not really even well informed of. We're hearing concerns on the local news, and yet those conversations are not happening in the community. So, you know, when pop is cheaper than milk, when junk food is cheaper than food, and then if we don't have access to the land where we go hunting and trapping and fishing and harvesting our own medicines and plants and berries, then those are the conversations we have to have here in the territories. It's not about, you know, the cost of food to be brought in, but about how do we make sure the food that we have from our own lands is being made available for us, by us. That's what we have to talk about.
Thank you all so much. We have 12 more minutes left in this panel, and so we're going to try and do a final round of everyone. And maybe if we could, if you would like to share whatever is on your mind, or if you could respond to the question of how in times of multiple crises like we're experiencing right now, that's based on centuries of crises, how do we build solidarity to really develop the solutions that we need? As Kiana was really emphasizing, in emergencies, we have to focus on the immediate needs of people. But how do we actually turn these moments of crisis into opportunities for building long-term change, systemic transformation? Noah was really emphasizing, as well as everyone else, that we need to emphasize our humanity and defend the sacred. And so these are basic elements to our struggle for a long-term transformation. So I'm going to pass it over to Maybe Kiana and then Noah for closing remarks. Thanks.
Noah, I'll let you go first. Because I think you said I feel like we've had conversations to this, and I feel like you speak on it so well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think that in terms of the future, the now and the future, I think that these crises, as with all crises, can be devastating and dangerous. But I think that crises are opportunities for us on an individual and collective level to reflect on why we're doing what we're doing, how we're doing what we're doing, and how that contributed to the crisis. And then how to change. And I think for me and a lot of the work that I do personally and also Safon's work is intergenerational connection, intergenerational exchange, and as Bridget said, making sure that what our ancestors left us, we're leaving to our children. To me, that's the big lesson, whether that be the land, whether that be our cultural practices, our cultural knowledges, our technical practices, technical knowledges, whether it be anything. Those are all essential to our survival. And I think that in addition, I think political education within and amongst our communities is extremely important. Political and cultural education. I think within and across our communities, I think that one of the big gulfs that I see a lot is there's a difference between the ability and political education. So there's a lot of folks who have technical knowledge of how to farm, but don't necessarily have the political education. And there's a lot of people who don't know how to farm who have the political education, and kind of bridging those two things together, I think is going to be the source of a lot of, a better future for our children, frankly. And I hope that some way that corporate power can always be met and opposed, and as corporate power weakens, that it can be smashed, and our alternative community power and community sovereignty can fill the vacuum.
Awesome. Thank you. Hard to follow up, but I put myself in this position. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what continues to strike me is how resilient our solidarity-based work and models, our relationships are. I think what Noah's saying about our education is, and trainings are so important, and like really leveraging our shared strengths and finding ways to really build amongst each other to support not just ourselves through crisis, but building towards the alternative ways and systems that we know will help us thrive. And I think, in thinking of structures, we can't continue to only see racial injustice as a siloed thing, only see environmental injustice as a siloed thing, and only see economic injustice as a siloed thing. Like we're never going to really solve it until we, hold like they're intersectional, but yet so much of what we're pushing against are social constructs. And I think if we continue to find ways to build power within ourselves, to continue to find ways to redistribute resources amongst ourselves, really start to push back on the messaging and narrative and the corporate capture, and like gain our power in politics, gain our power in land stewardship, and build the economic effect that we want, this multiplier, then, and really start to divest from trying to find ways to reknit a system that is so extractive and not working, but really continue to find ways to build alternative systems rooted in ancestral practices and rooted in ancestral ways of collaboration. Like, we're not gonna have a future without really, you know, connecting to what kept our folks whole and kept us going. And I really think it's, sorry, it's been a long day. I mean, I appreciate counter mobilizations like this. I think it's good to have these kind of discourses and conversations to engage with each other across territories. I think it's also good to even have it during times of corporate capture try to demonstrate how successful they are, because then we're actually really able to amplify solutions, and not just like leaders and talkers that kind of do these kind of talks often, but truly finding ways to support and amplify the folks on the ground and the practices on the ground in the models. So I think it's, instead of continuing to see our work as outliers or buy into that, continuing to allow like the messaging to make it sound like we're the fringe, we're actually the solutions. We actually hold solutions, and we're actually the way forward. I hope that made sense. I'm so sorry. I think my caffeine did.
Yeah, thank you so much. So as we close, we've got 4 minutes left, so maybe we could go Bridget, Gabriel, Jim for your final comments. And a quick thank you to our interpreters. Without you all, this would not be possible. So Bridget, Gabriel, Jim.
Thank you, and thank you for this panel. And I learned a lot this morning, and from very passionate, informed siblings. You know, I think there's a need for more solidarity. And how do we do that? Not only on a piecemeal basis, but on a day-to-day lived experience, that we are connected. We have to be collective in our approaches, because we are up against big industry, we're up against big corporations, we're up against big money. And like I put in the chat, to a lot of people, we're you know, dispensable. We're in the way. And the easiest way is just to come in and bulldoze us and not respect who we are as rights holders and landowners and land protectors. So these are things that I think in every opportunity we have is to really emphasize the importance of our worldview, our humanity, and our right to live. And that's what it comes down to, is our right to live, because at the end of the day, the big corporations, what are they going to do with the destructive land, with all the money they have? It's not going to go anywhere, because you're killing Mother Earth. So keep up the good work. Look forward to future panels. Look forward to hearing about your good efforts, and yeah. Keep going.
Thank you. We need to end at exactly 1 p.m. So we have 2 minutes. So maybe 1 minute each for Gabriel and Jim. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. Well, in closing, I want to say there's a difference between abundance and scarcity. In the universe, abundance is a given in the universe. But when it comes to the issues that we're talking about there, capitalism makes things look like there's scarcity of resources. That is a make-believe, and that is what we are fighting. That is why we think we're in a crisis. There's no such crisis. It is just highlighting the injustices that the people at the bottom are facing. That's what it is, right? Now, are we talking about natural laws or human-made stuff? And those crises, these are human-made stuff. And that is why it can be changed. We're not fighting, we're not discussing natural laws that we want to change natural. No, these are human-made stuff and we can change it. And as I said, there's power in our hands. The question is, are you going to conform to what is there? Or are you going to commit something somebody says that says class suicide? Are you going to fight against and fight for a better world? Or are you going to conform to what is in there? And that is my challenge to you. Thank you, everyone.
Well, very briefly, I guess I would just end by saying that we all have to agree that food is different. Food should be a human right. And in order for everyone to have good food, urban and rural communities have to work together to get fair prices for farmers, fair wages for people that eat. The food has to be local, it has to be culturally appropriate, it has to be available, and we have to have fair markets to do this. I think that we need to recognize that the young farmers and the young fishermen that are in the same boat fighting industrial agriculture have to have a place in forming the new food system. And I'm really grateful that Tyler and Ayla were, as representatives of the Via Campesina youth movement, were able to facilitate this, because I think that's where our future lies. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks to all our panelists. Ayla, do you have any final comments before we end? The UN Food System Summit's in September, so this process of counter-mobilization continues for the next couple months and over the next decades as we fight to transform industrial agriculture. Ayla, thanks everybody.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, just wanted to offer a huge thank you to the panelists for making the time to be part of this today. It was really a pleasure to chat and learn with and from you all. So thank you, Gabriel, Bridget, Noah, Kiana, and Jim. And big thanks to Tyler for co-moderating, and also to Nadia and other members of the CSM for organizing this whole counter-mobilization and this panel. So have a great day, everyone, and onwards.
Thank you. Globalize the struggle, globalize hope.
Globalize hope.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Recording